A lonely millionaire, scarred by betrayal and loss, decides to test the honesty of his housekeeper's daughter. Pretending to sleep next to an open safe, he waits to catch the child giving in to temptation. But what she does with the money shatters years of distrust built up in the man's heart. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. Robert Miller never imagined he'd get to where he was. Not like this. Looking out the panoramic window of his mansion on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, he saw the city stretching out like a map of his conquests and his wounds. Every skyscraper, every distant light, seemed to tell a story of struggle, ambition, and survival. But inside that immense house, surrounded by gardens that looked more like living works of art, Robert felt only the weight of silence. A silence that wasn't peace, but absence. The absence of laughter, of genuine conversation, of eyes that weren't calculating how much they could gain from being near him. At 53, Robert had built an empire in tech and investments. He'd started from nothing, the son of a local shop owner and an elementary school teacher, and had grown up watching his parents work to exhaustion to ensure he got a decent education. He went to public school until he landed a scholarship to a private university, and that's where his life began to change. Smart, determined, and with a business acumen few could match, Robert climbed rungs that seemed impossible. By 30, he had his own company. By 40, he was one of the most respected entrepreneurs in the country. But success came at a high price. A very high price. His first partner, a college friend who had sworn eternal loyalty, embezzled millions in a scheme that nearly destroyed everything Robert had built. The betrayal was discovered too late, after the money was gone and the trust was shattered. Robert lost not only financial resources, but also the naivete to believe that friendship and business could go hand in hand. He rebuilt the empire alone, tooth and nail, but the scar of that betrayal never left his soul. Then came the marriage. Patricia was everything Robert thought he wanted. Beautiful, elegant, from a traditional old-money New York family with a last name that opened doors in the city's most exclusive circles. They married in a grand ceremony, with over 500 guests, and built a life that from the outside looked perfect. But on the inside, the relationship was as cold as marble. Patricia was interested in Robert's bank account, the charity dinners where she could show off her jewelry, the international trips where she took photos for social media. She wasn't interested in him. Not really. The divorce came after 15 years of a marriage that was pure performance. Patricia took half of everything, as required by law, and then tried to take more, inventing stories, distorting facts, and using expensive lawyers to bleed every last drop she could extract. Robert emerged from that process not just poorer, but completely emotionally drained. He swore to himself he would never again let anyone get close enough to hurt him like that. The mansion where he now lived alone was far too big for one person. 3 floors, 12 bedrooms, halls that could host hundreds of people, a heated indoor pool, gardens that required a full team to maintain, and a garage for 10 imported cars that rarely moved. Everything was impeccable, organized and cold. The walls were white, the furniture modern and minimalist, the contemporary art strategically placed. But there was no warmth, no life. It was like living in a museum gallery after hours, when the visitors have gone home and only the empty objects remain. Robert had staff, of course, a small, rigorously selected team, a driver, 2 security guards, a gardener who came 3 times a week, and 3 people responsible for cleaning and organizing the house. He kept them all at a distance. He paid well, very well, but made it clear he wanted no intimacy. No personal conversations, no talk of family problems, no forming of bonds. Work was work, money for services. Simple as that. Among the staff was Maria Sanchez. She had only been working at the house for 6 months, hired after the previous housekeeper quit to care for her sick mother. Maria was different from the others who had passed through the mansion. Quiet, discreet, efficient. She did her job without complaining, without asking for favors, without trying to make small talk. Robert barely exchanged words with her. He would greet her with a nod when he saw her, and she would respond in kind, always keeping her eyes down, always respectful. What Robert didn't know was the story Maria carried. She was 32, but she seemed to bear the weight of a lifetime of struggle. She got pregnant at 17, still a junior in high school, with a boyfriend who promised to stand by her forever, and then disappeared as soon as he heard the news. Maria's family, deeply religious and strict, didn't accept it. They said she had brought shame upon the family name, that she was a disappointment, that she had to bear the consequences of her mistakes alone. Maria left, home with the clothes on her back and a small suitcase. She slept in shelters, worked any job she could find, cleaning, restaurant kitchens, laundry, elder care. When Isabella was born, a small, fragile girl with eyes full of life, Maria made a silent vow as she held that tiny being in her arms for the first time. She would raise her daughter with dignity, honesty, and love, even if the whole world turned its back on them. And that's exactly what she did. Isabella was now 10, and was the reason Maria woke up every day before sunrise. The girl attended a public school in the neighborhood where they lived in the Bronx, a world away from the luxury of the Upper East Side. Maria made sure to keep up with every homework assignment, every test, every parent-teacher conference. She taught her daughter that character was worth more than anything in the world, that stealing was wrong even when you were hungry, that lying was unacceptable even when the truth hurt. December arrived, cold in New York, as always. The schools went on winter break, and Maria found herself in a difficult situation. She had no one to leave. Isabella withdrawing her work hours. The neighbor who usually watched the girl was traveling to visit relatives. After much hesitation, Maria spoke with Celia Rodriguez, the mansion's administrator, a 48-year-old woman who managed the staff and controlled every detail of the household routine. Celia was strict, controlling, and made it clear she ran the place with an iron fist. She had reached the position of administrator after years working as Robert's personal assistant, and prided herself on knowing every corner of that mansion, every habit of her boss, every secret kept within those white walls. When Maria asked for permission to bring Isabella for a few days, Celia frowned. Children didn't belong in that environment, she said. The mansion wasn't a place for playing. It wasn't an amusement park. But Robert was away on business, and Celia, after much resistance, finally gave in on one condition. The girl had to be invisible, quiet, not a bother, and not touch anything. Maria thanked her with a trembling voice and promised that Isabella would be as silent as a shadow. Isabella entered that enormous house with wide eyes. She had never seen anything like it. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings looked like waterfalls of light. The marble floors shone so brightly she could see her own reflection. The staircases were wide, covered in a red carpet that looked like something out of a movie. The girl held her mother's hand tightly, intimidated by so much grandeur. Maria gave her clear instructions. Isabella was to sit in a discreet corner of the indoor garden, away from the main areas, with her coloring books and a few other books. She couldn't run, couldn't shout, couldn't explore. The girl agreed, serious, understanding that this was important for her mother. For the first few days, everything went well. Isabella stayed quiet, drawing, reading, sometimes humming softly the songs she learned at school. Maria worked even harder, wanting to prove that her daughter's presence wasn't a disruption. She cleaned, organized, and wiped every surface until it gleamed. Robert returned from his trip on a Thursday afternoon. He entered the mansion tired, with that familiar sense of emptiness. He greeted Celia with a nod, went up to his office on the second floor and sank into the leather armchair facing the window. From there he could see the gardens, the pool, and a piece of the city in the distance. That's when he saw her. A small girl, her hair in a ponytail, sitting in the indoor garden with a book in her lap. He frowned. Who was that child? What was she doing here? He called Celia on the intercom. The administrator appeared in less than 2 minutes, always prompt, always efficient. Robert pointed to the window. Who is that girl, Celia? The administrator swallowed hard. It was Maria's daughter, the housekeeper. She explained the situation, said the school was on break, that it was only for a few days, that the child wasn't causing any trouble. Robert was silent for a long moment, looking at the girl below. Something stirred inside him, a strange feeling he couldn't name. It wasn't anger, it wasn't annoyance, it was something else. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a distant memory of when he was a child and would go with his mother to the places she cleaned to supplement the family income. "It's fine," he said finally. "She can stay, but keep her out of the main areas." Celia nodded, relieved, and left. Robert continued to watch the girl for a few more minutes before turning his attention back to the papers on his desk. But that night an idea began to form in his mind, a dark idea, born from years of distrust and disillusionment. Robert was absolutely certain of one thing: everyone, without exception, had a price. Everyone succumbed to temptation when the opportunity arose. He had learned this in the most painful way possible, time and time again. Friends, partners, his wife, they all showed their true colors when money was on the line. What if he could prove it one more time? What if he could confirm that his worldview was correct, that his suspicion was justified? The idea took shape. A test, simple, direct, revealing. He would create an obviously tempting situation and observe what happened, not to punish anyone, not to cause harm, but simply to confirm what he already knew, that human nature was predictable, that everyone stole when they thought they wouldn't get caught. The next morning, Friday, Robert set everything up. In his second-floor office there was an old safe, more decorative than functional, which he always kept closed. That morning he opened the safe and placed several $100 bills inside, stacked messily, as if they had been left there in a hurry. He left the safe door wide open, visible to anyone who entered the office. Then he told Celia he needed the office cleaned that afternoon. He hadn't asked for that in a long time, but he said he was expecting important visitors and wanted everything to be impeccable. Celia, ever obedient, confirmed that Maria would take care of it. Robert then prepared himself. He put on comfortable clothes, arranged some cushions in the armchair that faced away from the door, at an angle where his face would be hard to see, and sat down. He pretended to fall asleep, relaxed his body and controlled his breathing to appear to be in a deep slumber. But his senses were on high alert. Every sound would be caught, every movement noticed. Almost an hour passed. Robert began to wonder if the test would even happen that day. But then he heard it. Light footsteps in the hallway, the door opening slowly. More footsteps, now inside the office. But they were different. They weren't the steps of an adult. They were small, hesitant steps. The girl. Robert kept his eyes closed, his breathing steady. He heard the child stop, probably, spotting the open safe and the exposed money. The silence stretched for long seconds, and then, instead of hearing the sound of hands grabbing the money, Robert heard something completely unexpected. The girl knelt. He could hear the sound of her knees on the floor. And then she began to handle the money, but not in the way he expected. She was organizing it, stacking the bills carefully, one by one, aligning the edges, sorting them by denomination, and as she did, she sang. Softly, almost a whisper, a children's song Robert didn't recognize. Her voice was sweet, innocent, completely calm. Robert felt something tighten in his chest. This wasn't in the script. This didn't make sense. He forced himself to remain still, not to open his eyes, not to reveal that he was watching everything. The girl continued her work for several minutes. She organized all the money, leaving everything neat inside the safe. And then Robert heard her speak to herself in that childish but firm voice. "There. Now it's all organized. Mommy always says we can't take what isn't ours. I'm just helping make it look nice." Robert felt as if something inside him had cracked, a small but deep fissure in the armor of distrust he had built over the years. He heard the girl get up and leave the office, closing the door gently. He waited a few more minutes before opening his eyes. He stood up slowly, as if waking from a real sleep, and walked to the safe. There was the money, all of it, organized, stacked, untouched. Not a single bill was missing. Robert stood there, looking at those piles of cash organized by small, innocent hands, and for the first time in a long time he didn't know what to feel. His absolute certainty about human nature had just been shattered by a 10-year-old child. He sat back down in the armchair, but now he wasn't pretending to sleep. He just looked out at the city, lost in thoughts he couldn't organize. Who was this girl? How had she learned such values at such a young age, coming from a place where money was likely scarce? An hour later, he heard raised voices in the hallway. He recognized Maria's voice, tense and frightened. He got up and opened the office door. The scene he witnessed disturbed him even more. Maria was kneeling in front of Isabella, holding the girl's shoulders firmly, her face a mixture of fear and determination. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear and firm. "Isabella, I've told you 1,000 times. You can't touch anything in this house, nothing. Not to tidy up, not to help, not for any reason. Do you understand? This is not our place. We don't own these things." The girl's eyes were welling up, but she wasn't crying. "I was just making it look nice, Mommy. I didn't take anything, I just organized it." Maria squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back. Tears. "I know, my love. I know you're a good girl, but people might not understand. They might think you were doing something wrong. You need to stay away from other people's money. You need to stay away from everything that isn't ours. Promise, Mommy?" Isabella nodded seriously. "I promise." Maria hugged her daughter tightly, and Robert could see her shoulders shaking. When they finally separated, Maria stood up and went straight to the office. She entered without knocking, her eyes red, and went directly to the safe. She gathered all the money with trembling hands, closed the safe, and turned to leave. It was only then that she saw Robert standing there watching everything. Her face went pale. "Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. My daughter shouldn't have come in here. She didn't take anything, I swear. She just organized it. But I've already spoken to her. It won't happen again. Please don't fire us. Please. I need this job." Robert was silent for a long moment, looking at this woman who was trembling with fear of losing her job, but who had first rushed to protect her daughter's integrity, to teach the right lesson before thinking of herself. "It's all right, Maria," he said finally, his voice softer than he intended. "I'm not going to fire you. Your daughter did nothing wrong." Maria seemed unable to believe what she was hearing, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It won't happen again." She left quickly, leading Isabella by the hand. Robert was left alone in the hallway, watching the mother and daughter disappear down the stairs. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He sat in the first-floor library with a glass of whiskey he barely touched, thinking about the girl organizing the money, thinking about the mother teaching values so firmly and lovingly, thinking about how certain he had been that all people were corrupt, greedy, self-serving. And now? Now he had seen something different with his own eyes. He had seen pure, innocent, selfless honesty in a child, in a poor child, in a child who, theoretically, would have every reason to take that money and never look back. But she didn't take it. She organized it, and she sang while she did it. Robert ran a hand over his face, tired. Maybe the world wasn't as black and white as he had decided it was. Maybe there were still good people, people with integrity, people who didn't have a price. Or maybe they were just exceptions, statistical anomalies in a world where greed was still the rule. He decided he needed to know more. Who was this woman? What life had she lived to raise a daughter like that? And more importantly, was this real or just a temporary facade? The next day, Saturday, Robert called Celia to his office and asked about Maria. He wanted to know how long she had worked there, where she came from, if she had caused any problems. Celia, always detail-oriented, pulled Maria's file. "She's been here for 6 months, Celia explained. "She's a good worker, never complained, never asked for an advance, never missed a day. She's a bit reserved, doesn't talk much with the other staff. Lives in the Bronx, just has the daughter, no husband. That's all I know." Robert nodded thoughtfully, and he told Celia to increase Maria's salary that month, discreetly. He didn't want explanations, didn't want a fuss. He just wanted to do something, even without knowing exactly why. When Maria received her paycheck the following Monday and saw the higher amount, she was confused. She went to Celia thinking there had been a mistake, but Celia, following Robert's instructions, said it was a year-end bonus, nothing special. Maria left still confused but deeply grateful. That extra money meant she could buy new sneakers for Isabella, whose shoes were getting tight. It meant she could pay the overdue electric bill. It meant a little breathing room in a budget that was always stretched too thin. That night, alone in her small two-room apartment on the outskirts of the city, Maria hugged Isabella and silently gave thanks for everything they had. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it was honest. Robert, in his huge, empty mansion, also looked out the window that night, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. There was a spark of something he thought he had lost forever, something small, fragile, but that insisted on shining. It was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't as cruel as he had decided it was. But that hope would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined, because inside that mansion, not everyone looked kindly on what was happening. And envy, when planted in fertile soil, grows fast and with deep roots. The storm was just beginning. The following weeks brought a subtle but noticeable change to the mansion. Robert began to pay attention to things that had previously gone unnoticed. He watched Maria work, always discreet, always efficient, with that air of someone carrying more responsibilities than her shoulders should have to bear. He saw Isabella on the days the girl was still there, always quiet, always obedient, with that book in her lap and those curious eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the world around her. But Robert wasn't the only one watching. Celia Rodriguez had noticed the changes, small things that others might have missed, but that were impossible for her, who controlled every penny spent in that house, to ignore. The raise in Maria's salary, the fact that Robert had never complained about the girl's presence, the way he sometimes asked in passing if everything was okay with the staff, something he had never done before. Celia had worked for Robert for over 10 years. She had started as a secretary, moved up to personal assistant, and finally reached the position of mansion administrator. She knew his every mood, every preference, every quirk, and one of the things she knew best was the deep distrust he had for everyone. So, seeing Robert seemingly develop some kind of interest in a simple housekeeper bothered her deeply. Celia wasn't evil. Not exactly, but she was ambitious and territorial. She had built her position with great effort and had no intention of letting anyone threaten it. And Maria, with her almost irritating humility and her overly well-behaved daughter, was starting to look like a threat. The other employees noticed too. Paul, the driver, mentioned at lunch that the boss had given Maria a raise. Sylvia and Regina, the other two housekeepers, exchanged meaningful glances. Why had only she gotten a raise? Didn't they work just as hard? Hadn't they been there longer? The rumors started quietly, as they always do. Someone suggested that maybe Maria had done something special to deserve the raise. Someone else raised an eyebrow suggestively. Celia didn't directly fuel these rumors, but she did nothing to stop them either. After all, she thought, if Maria was getting special favors from the boss, the other employees had a right to know. January arrived, bringing the biting cold typical of a New York winter. The city was frozen, the pavement icy, and inside Robert's climate-controlled mansion, the emotional temperature was also beginning to rise. It was that month that Julia Miller arrived. Julia was Robert's niece, the daughter of his younger brother, Michael, who lived in Washington, D.C. At 23, Julia was everything Robert had learned to distrust: beautiful, charming, and completely spoiled. She had grown up in wealth, attended expensive private schools, traveled abroad every year, and developed that subtle arrogance of someone who has never had to fight for anything. Michael had called Robert at the end of December, asking for a favor. Julia had just graduated with a degree in marketing but didn't want to work yet. She was bored in D.C., all her friends were traveling, and she wanted to spend some time in New York. Could she stay with Robert for a few weeks, maybe a month or two? Robert hesitated. He didn't like visitors. He didn't like having to share his space, his routine, his chosen solitude. But Michael was his brother, and despite not being close, there was still some sense of family obligation. He ended up agreeing, but made it clear that he had work, that he wouldn't be a full-time host, that Julia would have to fend for herself. Julia arrived on a Monday afternoon, stepping out of a luxury rideshare with 3 large suitcases and a designer handbag, that probably cost more than Maria's monthly salary. She wore huge sunglasses, very short shorts, and a silk blouse that revealed more than it concealed. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her nails impeccably manicured, and the expensive perfume she exuded filled the air. "Uncle Robert," she said with a rehearsed smile, giving him a quick hug without really touching him. "Thanks for having me. DC was unbearable, you have no idea." Robert just nodded, indicating that Celia would show her to her room. Julia went up the stairs as if she owned the place, commenting on the decor, suggesting changes and complaining that the air conditioning was too strong. For the first few days, Julia mostly stayed in her room, only coming out to eat or use the pool. She spent hours on social media, taking pictures of the mansion, the pool, the view, always with perfect filters and captions about how she was relaxing at her NYC getaway. Robert barely saw her, which was a relief. But on Thursday of that week, Julia decided to explore the house. She wandered through the hallways, entered rooms no one used, and touched things that weren't hers. That's when she found Maria cleaning the first-floor library. Julia watched her for a moment, leaning against the doorframe with that air of superiority that came so naturally to her. Maria was carefully cleaning the shelves, taking out each book, wiping it down and putting it back in place. She hadn't even noticed Julia's presence. "Hi," Julia said finally, startling Maria and making her almost drop a book. "Good afternoon," Maria replied, immediately lowering her eyes. "Can I help you with something?" Julia gave a small, almost mocking smile. "No, just curious. You're new here, aren't you?" "I've been working here for a few months." "And that little girl I saw in the garden, is she your daughter?" Maria swallowed hard. "Yes, Ma'am. But she was only here during the school break. Now that classes are back, she doesn't come anymore." Julia nodded slowly, her eyes scanning Maria from head to toe, noting the simple uniform, the rough hands from so much work, the humble posture. "I see. And you live far from here?" "In the Bronx, Ma'am." "So far. You must wake up very early, I imagine." "I do, Ma'am." Julia was silent for another moment, just observing, and then turned and left, leaving Maria with a strange sense of unease. There was something in that look, in that tone of voice, that wasn't just curiosity. It was something more calculated, colder. In the following days, Julia began to pay attention to everything that happened in the house. She watched. The employees asked subtle questions and initiated seemingly innocent conversations that were actually disguised interrogations. She found out about Maria's raise. She found out about Isabella organizing the money in the office. And an idea began to form in her mind. Julia had come to New York not just to escape boredom, but also because she was in financial trouble that she didn't want her family to know about. She had spent far more than she should have, had credit card debts she couldn't pay and needed money. She knew Robert was extremely wealthy, but she also knew he wouldn't just give her money for no reason. So she started to plan. If she could create situations where it seemed like things were going missing, and if she could pin the blame on Maria and her daughter, maybe Robert would realize how foolish he had been to trust them. And maybe, in the process, Julia could pocket a few valuable items to sell discreetly and pay off her debts. The first thing that disappeared was a gold pen that Robert kept in his office. It was an old Mont Blanc, a gift from a Japanese businessman years ago. Robert noticed it. Was missing, but didn't think much of it at first. He figured he might have put it somewhere else and forgotten. But then other things started to disappear. A Swiss watch from the living room, a box of expensive Cuban cigars, a small silver picture frame. Nothing that would be missed immediately, but valuable items. Julia, always observant, would comment on the disappearances. "Wow, Uncle, that's so weird. Don't you think someone might be taking these things? You should be careful, you know. After all, you have so many employees here." Robert started to get uneasy. The old distrust, which had been dormant since the incident with Isabella, began to awaken. He had more security cameras installed, but discreetly. He wanted to catch whoever it was red-handed. Celia, taking advantage of the situation, began to make subtle comments. "Mr. Miller, I don't want to accuse anyone without proof, but these things started disappearing after that employee started getting special treatment. Maybe she's gotten too comfortable. Maybe she thinks she can do whatever she wants. Robert didn't respond, but the words echoed in his mind. Was it possible? Had he been fooled by a rehearsed act of honesty? Had that whole organizing the money thing been just a strategy to gain his trust before she started stealing for real? The doubt was like poison. Once planted, it grew and spread. Maria felt the change in the atmosphere of the house. The other employees had become more distant. Celia watched her with cold eyes. Even Robert, who had been kind after the money incident, now seemed to avoid her. She didn't understand what had happened, but she felt that something was very wrong. One afternoon in February, Isabella showed up at the mansion again. It was parent-teacher conference day at school, and Maria had to work a few extra hours. She asked for permission to bring her daughter again, promising it would be just for that day. Robert, distracted by company problems, waved a yes without paying much attention. Isabella stayed in the garden as usual, quiet, drawing in her notebook. But it was freezing outside, and after a while she asked her mother if she could come inside and stay in the living room, which was warm. Maria hesitated, but eventually agreed, as long as the girl didn't touch anything. Isabella went inside and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, continuing her drawings. The room was enormous, with elegant furniture, Persian rugs, and several modern sculptures strategically placed. One of them, a blue glass piece representing an ocean wave, was positioned on a low table near the window. The girl was so focused on her drawings that she didn't notice when her backpack, as she shifted, bumped against the table. The sculpture wobbled. Isabella looked up, startled, and reached out to try and catch the piece before it fell. But it was too late. The sound of glass shattering against the marble floor echoed throughout the house. Isabella froze, her eyes wide with panic, staring at the blue shards scattered on the floor. Her hands were trembling. She hadn't meant to do it. It wasn't malicious. It was an accident. But she knew, even as a child, that this was serious, very serious. Maria came running, as white as a sheet. Behind her came Celia, Sylvia, Regina, and Paul, and finally Robert, coming down the stairs with firm steps and a grim face. Everyone stared at the scene: the paralyzed girl, the broken glass, the empty table where the sculpture had been. Celia was the first to speak, her voice laced with ill-disguised satisfaction. "I warned you, Mr. Miller. I warned you it wasn't appropriate to have children here. Now look what's happened." Robert looked at the shards, then at Isabella, then at Maria. The housekeeper had tears streaming down her face, but not of self-pity. They were tears of shame and desperation. "Mr. Miller, I'm so sorry. I'll pay for the sculpture. I'll pay in installments. I'll work for free, whatever you want. But please don't send us away. It was an accident. My daughter didn't mean any harm." Julia, who had heard the crash and come down, watched the scene with interest. She crossed her arms and said with false concern, "Poor girl, but you know, Uncle, these things happen when you let outsiders into environments they're not used to. They don't know the value of things. They don't know how to behave. It's not their fault, it's just incompatibility." Julia's words, seemingly understanding but laced with venom, hit Maria like slaps. The housekeeper pressed her lips together, lowering her head even further. Robert remained silent, looking at the scene. A war was raging inside him. On one hand, the anger at having his property destroyed, at having trusted, and having that trust seemingly betrayed by the items that had been disappearing. On the other hand, the memory of that morning in the office, of the girl organizing the money, singing softly, without any malice. Isabella finally found her voice, small and trembling. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean to break it. It was an accident. My mom always teaches me to be careful with things, but I bumped it without looking. I'm sorry, please." The sincerity in the child's voice was impossible to fake. Robert knew that, but he also knew that things had gone missing. And now, something had been destroyed. How could he distinguish between an honest accident and purposeful carelessness? Celia seized the silence. "With all due respect, Mr. Miller, I think it's time to make a decision. We can't keep having these kinds of situations. The morale among the staff is terrible. Everyone thinks there's favoritism. And now this. Maybe it would be for the best if Maria looked for another job, a place more suitable for her and her daughter." The suggestion hung in the air like a death sentence. Maria held Isabella's hand so tightly that the girl winced in pain, but didn't complain. Robert took a deep breath. "I'll think about what to do," he said finally, his voice tired. "For today, you can all go. Everyone can go. Celia, have someone clean this up." Maria and Isabella left quickly, the girl crying softly, the mother trying to maintain her composure until they reached the locker room where they kept their things. When they were finally alone, Maria hugged her daughter tightly, allowing herself to cry as well. "It's okay, my love. It was an accident. We're going to be okay. God will take care of us." But Isabella, even at just 10 years old, felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. "I ruined everything, Mummy. You're going to lose your job because of me." "No, no, no. It wasn't your fault. These things happen, and if I lose this job, we'll find another one. We always find a way." But Maria knew it wouldn't be easy. Good jobs were rare. Bosses who paid on time and treated their employees with a minimum of respect were even rarer. And she had a daughter to raise, bills to pay, rent that was overdue. That night in the silent mansion, Julia smiled as she scrolled through her phone. Her plan was working perfectly. The broken sculpture had been an unexpected bonus. Now she just needed to deliver the final blow, and she already knew exactly how to do it. Upstairs, Robert was in his library, holding a glass of whiskey and looking at a photo he kept on his desk. It was of himself as a child, next to his mother, in front of the simple house where they had lived. His mother was wearing a maid's uniform. He was wearing a patched shirt and flip-flops. Had he forgotten where he came from? Had he become so rich and distant that he could no longer recognize honesty when he saw it? But then he thought of the missing items, the suspicion Celia planted, Julia's words about class incompatibility, and the doubt returned, corrosive and insistent. He didn't know who to trust. He didn't know what to believe, and this uncertainty was destroying him from the inside. Downstairs, Celia locked up the house, checking every door, every window. She felt she was in control of the situation, that she was finally protecting her territory from the intruder who had threatened her position. She didn't realize she was being used as a pawn in a much larger game, and Julia, in her luxurious room, planned her next move. In a few days, she would execute the cruelest part of her scheme, something that would leave no doubt in Robert's mind, something that would destroy once and for all any shred of trust he might still have. The storm was about to reach its peak, and when the thunder rolled, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the sculpture incident were tense and suffocating. Maria continued to work, but now, under a heavy silence that seemed to weigh on her shoulders like lead. The other employees barely spoke to her. When she entered a room, conversations stopped. When she walked down the hallways, she felt eyes following her movements, judging, condemning. Robert hadn't made a final decision about firing her, but he hadn't said she could stay either. This uncertainty was almost worse than an immediate dismissal. It was living in a constant limbo of anxiety, not knowing if she would still have a job the next day, if she could still pay the rent, if she could still put food on the table for Isabella. The girl, for her part, refused to go back to the mansion. Even when Maria had no one to leave her with, Isabella preferred to stay at the neighbor's house, helping with chores, rather than set foot again in the place where she had caused such a big problem. She had nightmares almost every night, dreaming of the sound of shattering glass, the disapproving looks of the adults, the feeling of having disappointed her mother. Julia watched it all with ill-disguised satisfaction. Her plan was working perfectly. She had managed to create a climate of suspicion and distrust. Now she just needed to deliver the final blow, something definitive, something that would leave no room for doubt or second chances. That's when she had the perfect idea. In her locked room, Julia opened the safe where she kept her jewelry. She took out an emerald necklace her grandmother had given her for her 18th birthday. It was valuable, yes, but Julia had other pieces, and this necklace would be the necessary sacrifice for her plan. She had already taken pictures of it, had the documentation, knew exactly what it was worth. After it was all over, she could claim it was stolen and file an insurance claim. 2 problems solved at once. Julia waited patiently for the right opportunity. It came on a Tuesday morning when Maria had to get cleaning supplies from the mansion's outdoor storage shed. This meant she would leave her purse in the staff locker room, as she always did. Julia went downstairs silently, making sure no one was around. The locker room was in a service area on the ground floor, separate from the main parts of the house. She went in, found Maria's worn-out purse hanging in the unlocked locker, and placed the necklace at the bottom between an old coat and a broken umbrella. Then she returned to her room, waited 2 hours, and started to cause a scene. She ran down the stairs, her face flushed, her eyes wide with feigned panic. "Uncle Robert! Uncle Robert! My necklace! My necklace is gone!" Robert was in a virtual meeting in his office, but came out when he heard the screams. "What is it, Julia?" "My emerald necklace, the one Grandma gave me. I left it on my dresser and now it's not there. Someone stole it. Someone came into my room and stole it." Celia appeared immediately, always alert to any problem in the house. "Are you sure you didn't put it somewhere else?" Julia stared at her indignantly. "Of course I'm sure. I'm not a child who forgets where she puts things. Someone stole it and I want you to search for it." Robert took a deep breath, feeling a headache coming on. "All right, we'll look. Celia, gather all the employees in the living room, now." In the next 15 minutes, the 5 employees who were in the house that day were summoned. Maria, Sylvia, Regina, Paul and the gardener, Mr. Frank. They all gathered in the living room, tense, not understanding what was happening. Robert faced them, his expression serious. "An emerald necklace has disappeared from my niece's room. It's a piece of great sentimental and financial value. I would like it if whoever took it, by mistake or for any other reason, returns it now. No questions, no consequences. Just return it." The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Julia, standing next to Robert, crossed her arms. "I know who took it," she said, her voice filled with false sadness. "I didn't want to believe it, but now I have no choice. It was her." She pointed directly at Maria. Maria felt her blood run cold. "Me? Mr. Miller, I swear to God I didn't take any necklace. I've never stolen anything in my life." Julia shook her head, as if disappointed. "You've been going into all the rooms of the house lately. I've seen you. And after everything that's happened, the things that have gone missing, the broken sculpture, it's not hard to connect the dots." "Mr. Miller," Maria repeated, her voice trembling now, desperate, "I didn't take it. Please, you have to believe me." Celia intervened, her voice cold and pragmatic. "Mr. Miller, I suggest we search everyone's bags. If the necklace hasn't been taken from the house yet, it must be with someone." Robert hesitated. That seemed excessive, invasive, but Julia insisted. "Please, Uncle, that necklace means so much to me. It was the last gift Grandma gave me before she passed. I need it back." Robert nodded slowly. "All right, bring your bags." One by one, the employees fetched their bags and opened them in front of everyone. Sylvia had only a wallet, tissues, and an empty lunch container. Regina had a purse full of cheap makeup and a magazine. Paul had a backpack with tools and his car registration. Mr. Frank had a cloth bag with a small notebook and a rosary. Only Maria was left. She brought her purse with trembling hands. It was an old, faded bag with a mended strap. She opened it slowly, showing the contents. A wallet with a few dollars, her Metro card, a worn-out lipstick, a photo of Isabella, a small notebook where she tracked her monthly expenses. Celia, without asking for permission, took the purse from Maria's hands and began to search more thoroughly. She stuck her hand inside, rummaged through the inner compartments, and then her expression changed. Her fingers touched something hard, cold, hidden at the bottom. She pulled out the emerald necklace. Maria's world collapsed in that instant. Julia let out a triumphant cry. "I knew it! I knew it! Look, she had it the whole time!" Maria stared at the necklace in Celia's hands, as if it were a venomous snake. "No," she repeated, her voice breaking. "That's not possible. That wasn't there. I didn't put that there. I don't know how it got there, but I didn't take it." The other employees looked at her with a mixture of shock and something that seemed like satisfaction that they weren't the ones being accused. Sylvia shook her head, disappointed. "And to think we thought you were different, Maria." "I didn't take it," Maria shouted now, tears streaming freely. "Someone put that in my bag. Someone is trying to frame me. Mr. Miller, please, you know me. You saw what my daughter did with the money that day. We don't steal. We're not like that." Robert was paralyzed, looking at the necklace, at Maria, at the whole scene. A war was raging inside him. The evidence was there, undeniable, in her bag. But at the same time, the memory of Isabella organizing the money, singing softly, came back to him with force. Julia pressed him. "Uncle, you have to call the police. This is theft. She has to be punished." "No," Robert said finally, his voice tired. "I'm not calling the police. But Maria, you're fired. Immediately. Get your things and leave. Now." Maria was crying so hard she could barely breathe. "Mr. Miller, please, my daughter. I have bills to pay. I need this job. I didn't take this necklace. I swear on my daughter's life I didn't take it." "Enough," Robert said, turning his back. "I don't want to hear any more. Leave." Maria stumbled out of that place, blinded by tears, clutching her empty purse to her chest. The other employees watched her leave in silence. Celia had a look of ill-disguised satisfaction. Julia was smiling openly, savoring her victory. But Robert, as he climbed the stairs back to his office, felt something very different from satisfaction or justice. He felt a corrosive doubt, a sense that something was deeply wrong. The desperation in Maria's voice was too real, the tears were too genuine, the denial was too sincere. He locked himself in his office and stayed there for hours, looking out at the city, thinking. The more he thought, the more uneasy he became. Something didn't add up. If Maria had really stolen the necklace, why would she carry it in her purse to work? Why not sell it immediately? Why not hide it somewhere safer? And then he remembered. Security cameras. He had installed new cameras after the first items went missing. Discreet cameras in strategic spots. The staff locker room had one. He could check if anyone besides Maria had gone in there. He could see the truth. He called the technician in charge of the security system and requested access to the recordings from the past few days. The technician sent everything via email. Robert started watching, fast-forwarding through the parts with no movement, paying attention to every entry and exit from the locker room. That's when he saw it. On that Tuesday morning, at 9:43 a.m., Julia appeared on the screen. She looked around, made sure she was alone, and entered the locker room. She was in there for less than 2 minutes. When she came out, her hands were empty, and she had a satisfied expression on her face. Robert rewound, watched it again, and again, and again. Julia had set the whole thing up. His own niece had planted the necklace in an innocent employee's bag just to frame her. She had lied. She had manipulated. She had destroyed the life of a woman and her daughter out of pure malice. The anger Robert felt in that moment was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't the cold anger of business betrayal. It wasn't the bitter anger of divorce. It was a burning, visceral rage of someone who realizes he has allowed a terrible injustice to be committed under his own roof. He saved the videos, copied them to a flash drive, and went downstairs with firm steps. Julia was in the living room, painting her nails, completely relaxed. She looked up when Robert entered and smiled. "Hi, Uncle. Good thing that's all sorted out, right? What a horrible situation." Robert stopped in front of her, his eyes as hard as stone. "Julia, I need you to come with me to the office now." His tone made Julia's smile falter. She realized something was wrong, but she still tried to maintain her facade. "Okay, what's up?" In the office, Robert plugged the flash drive into the computer and opened the video file. He turned the screen so Julia could see. He pressed play. Julia's face went pale as she saw herself entering the locker room. She opened her mouth, closed it, unable to find words. "You set it all up," Robert said, his voice low but filled with contained fury. "You put your own necklace in her bag. You lied. You destroyed an innocent woman's reputation. Why, for what?" Julia tried to deny it. "No, Uncle, it's not what it looks like. I just—" "Don't lie to me," Robert shouted now, making her shrink in her chair. "I have proof. You went into that locker room. You put the necklace there, and then you put on that whole show. I want to know why." Julia realized there was no way out. The tears came, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration at being caught. I was in debt, she finally admitted. I thought if she got fired, you'd pay more attention to Samasi, maybe help me out financially, and I could also file an insurance claim for the necklace later. Robert stared at her with a mixture of disgust and sadness. You destroyed a family for money, for credit card debt. Do you have any idea what you've done? Julia didn't answer, just cried. Get your things, Robert said, turning his back on her. You have 1 hour to get out of my house. I'm going to talk to your father, and I don't want you near me ever again. Julia tried to argue, to apologize, to promise she would change, but Robert was no longer listening. He called Paul and told him to help Julia pack and take her to the airport. She left in tears, humiliated, but Robert didn't feel a shred of pity. Next, he sent for Celia. The administrator appeared with her usual efficiency, but stopped when she saw the look on Robert's face. You knew, he said. It wasn't a question. Celia hesitated. Mr. Miller, You spread rumors. You fueled the suspicion. You wanted Maria out of here from the beginning. Why? Because you thought she was threatening your position. Celia looked down. I was just protecting your interests, sir. No, Robert said, his voice hard. You were protecting your territory, and in the process, you helped destroy an innocent woman. You're dismissed, Celia. Effective today. But Mr. Miller, I've worked for you for 10 years. And in those 10 years, you learned all my quirks, all my weaknesses, and you used them against more vulnerable people. I don't need someone like that working for me. You can go. Celia left, indignant, but she had no argument. She knew she had lost. Robert then picked up the phone and dialed the number from Maria's file. It rang 5 times before someone answered. It was Maria's choked voice. Hello? Maria, it's Robert Miller. Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. There was a long silence. Then, what do you want? Haven't you done enough? Maria, I made a terrible mistake. I found out the truth. You were framed. It was a setup. Please come back here. I need to apologize in person, and I need to correct this injustice. Maria started crying on the other end of the line. The truth? You found out the truth? Yes. It was my niece. She put the necklace in your bag. I have the videos. You were right. Someone was trying to hurt you. And I was foolish enough to believe it. Maria couldn't speak, only sobbed. Robert continued, Please come tomorrow. Bring Isabella. I need to apologize to both of you, and I need to somehow make up for what I did. When the call ended, Robert sank into his chair, exhausted. He had spent so many years building walls to protect himself that he had forgotten how to recognize the truth when it was right in front of him. He had allowed his own wounds to blind him to genuine honesty, and he had nearly destroyed 2 innocent lives in the process. That night, in the mansion now even emptier without Celia and Julia, Robert looked at the old photo of him and his mother. He touched the glass with his fingers, feeling the cold texture. I'm sorry, Mum, he whispered. I forgot where I came from. I forgot who I was. But I'm going to try to fix it. I promise. Far away in the Bronx, in her small apartment, Maria was hugging Isabella tightly. The girl didn't fully understand what had happened, but she knew something important had changed. She knew her mother was crying, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. The storm had passed. The truth had won. And tomorrow, when the sun rose, it would be the beginning of something new, something none of them could have ever imagined. The next morning dawned differently. The sun streamed through the mansion's windows with an intensity that seemed to want to wash away all the darkness of the previous days. Robert woke up early as usual, but this time with a weight in his chest that wasn't just the usual emptiness. It was guilt. It was shame. It was the painful recognition that he had allowed his own wounds to hurt innocent people. He got ready carefully. He put on simple clothes without his usual formality. He dismissed the driver and went to pick up Maria and Isabella himself. He wanted to do this personally. He needed to do this personally. When he arrived at the address from the employee file, Robert had to double-check if he was in the right place. The building was old. With peeling paint and a rusty gate, he climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs, the smell of mildew and cooking mingling in the stuffy air. When he reached the apartment door, he hesitated before knocking. Maria opened it almost immediately. She must have been waiting. Her eyes were swollen, but there was no anger in them, just exhaustion, and maybe a fragile, frightened hope. "Mr. Miller," she said softly. "Please," Robert replied. "Call me Robert. May I come in?" Maria opened the door fully. The apartment was tiny. A living room that also served as a bedroom, with a sofa bed where Maria clearly slept. A small room where Isabella had her simple but neatly made bed. A kitchen the size of a closet. A bathroom that could barely fit one person, but everything was clean, organized, and cared for with love. Isabella was sitting on her bed, still in her pajamas, hugging a worn teddy bear. When she saw Robert, she flinched, afraid. Robert felt his heart clench. This girl was afraid of him. This child who had shown more integrity than any adult he knew, now saw him as a threat. He knelt, getting down to her level. "Isabella," he said gently, "I came to apologize. To you and your mother. I made a very big mistake. I didn't believe you when I should have, and you were punished for something you didn't do. That was very wrong of me." Isabella looked at her mother, confused. Maria nodded, encouraging her. The girl turned her eyes back to Robert. "You're not going to send us away?" "No," Robert said, feeling tears burn his eyes. "I'm not. In fact, I was hoping you would come back, if you want to, if you can forgive me." That's when Maria spoke, her voice firm despite the emotion. "Sir Robert, I accept your apology. But you need to understand something. I work for you because I need to feed my daughter, I need to pay rent, I need to survive, but I can't work in a place where I'm not trusted, where at any moment I can be accused of something I didn't do. That's not a life, that's torture." Robert nodded slowly. "I understand, and you're absolutely right. That's why I dismissed my niece and my administrator. That's why I'm here in person, to apologize and to propose something different." Maria frowned. "Something different?" Robert took a deep breath. "I spent all night thinking about everything that happened, about everything I've become. I built a fortune, but I lost my humanity in the process. I built walls so high to protect myself that I ended up trapping myself. And when someone finally showed me that there's still goodness in the world," he gestured toward Isabella, "I didn't know how to recognize it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have a foundation, the Miller Foundation for Social Development. It was set up years ago for tax purposes, but I confess I never paid much attention to it. It has staff who manage it, write reports, but I was never really involved. But now I realize I should be, and I realize I need someone with real values to lead the wellness division. Someone who understands what it's like to struggle, what it's like to be in need, what it's like to raise a child alone while facing the world's prejudice." Maria stared at him, not fully understanding where this was going. "I want you to work at the foundation," Robert said, "as the coordinator of wellness and family development, with full autonomy, a proper salary, benefits, and the first thing I want you to do is investigate the working conditions of all my employees, at the mansion, at my companies, everywhere. I want to know if anyone is being exploited, made invisible, disrespected, and I want to fix it." Maria blinked, incredulous. You're offering me a leadership position?" "I am. And I also want to pay for Isabella's education, private school, supplies, uniform, everything. She deserves to have the same opportunities as any wealthy child. And more importantly," he looked directly at the girl, "I want to learn from you, to learn to see the world with honest eyes again." Isabella let go of her teddy bear and, to everyone's surprise, including her own, got up and hugged Robert. "Thank you," she whispered. Robert hugged her back, and that's when the tears he had been holding back finally fell. He cried there, holding that little girl, releasing years of loneliness, distrust, and pain. Maria was crying too, unable to believe this was really happening. When they finally separated, Maria wiped her tears and asked, "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping us like this?" Robert smiled, a sad but honest smile. "Because you reminded me of who I was, before I became rich, and because I realized I don't want to live in a prison of distrust anymore. I want to rebuild. I want to do things differently, and I need help to do that. In the following days, Maria started her new role. She had autonomy, as Robert promised, and she used it wisely. She spoke with each employee at the mansion individually, in neutral places where they felt comfortable speaking the truth. She discovered things Robert had never imagined. Sylvia, the housekeeper, had been pressured by Celia for months to work unpaid overtime. Regina had a daughter with special needs and needed to leave early on Tuesdays for the girls' therapy, but was afraid to ask. Mr. Frank, the gardener, had health problems but didn't have adequate medical insurance. Paul, the driver, hadn't had a raise in 3 years, even as inflation ate away at his salary. Maria compiled everything into a detailed report and presented it to Robert. He read every line with growing attention, feeling ashamed of himself. How had he let things get to this point? How had he been so blind? He implemented changes immediately. All employees received retroactive raises. Regina was given a flexible schedule. Mr. Frank was enrolled in a premium health plan. Paul received a bonus and had his hours reduced, and a new rule was established: monthly meetings where any employee could speak directly to Robert about problems, suggestions, or needs. But the changes didn't stop at the mansion. Maria, with her new position at the foundation, began visiting Robert's companies. She spoke with employees at all levels, from security guards to managers. She uncovered more cases of exploitation, of workplace bullying, of inadequate conditions, and Robert, who used to delegate everything and never get directly involved, was now present at every meeting, every discussion, every implementation of change. The foundation, once a bureaucratic entity that existed only on paper, began to function for real. Maria created adult literacy programs, daycare centers for employees' children, vocational training courses, and free psychological assistance. Robert funded it all with renewed enthusiasm, realizing that for the first time in years, he was using his money for something that truly mattered. Isabella, for her part, started at a private school at the beginning of the second semester. On the first day, Maria took her personally, nervous, wanting to make sure her daughter would be okay. The girl wore a new uniform, a new backpack, new supplies, but what shone brightest wasn't the new things. It was the confidence in her eyes. Robert had asked to be there too. He wanted to see Isabella start this new chapter. When the girl walked into the classroom and turned to wave at her mother and him, Robert felt an emotion so intense he had to turn his face to hide his tears. "She's going to go far," he said to Maria. "You've raised a special girl." Maria smiled, pride written all over her face. "I just taught her what's right. The rest is just who she is." As the months went by, the atmosphere in the mansion changed completely. It was no longer that cold, clinical, sterile place. There was laughter in the hallways. There were genuine conversations in the kitchen. The employees no longer walked around in fear, with their eyes downcast. They walked with dignity, knowing they were respected. Robert began to spend more time at home. Before, he would avoid the place, leaving early and coming back late, eating out, traveling unnecessarily. Now he enjoyed being there. He liked talking to Paul about baseball. He liked hearing Mr. Frank's stories about growing up in the countryside. He liked watching Maria work, always with that quiet determination. And he loved it when Isabella came over on weekends or holidays. The girl had opened up, no longer afraid. She talked to him about school, about the books she was reading, about her dreams. She wanted to be a doctor, she said. She wanted to help people. Robert always smiled when she said that. Of course she wanted to help people. It was who she was. One day, 6 months after everything had happened, Robert called Maria for a talk in his office. She entered with a bit of residual apprehension, a memory of the bad times, but he quickly put her at ease with a smile. "Sit down, Maria. I need to tell you something important." She sat, attentive. "I was thinking," Robert began, "about family, about what that means. For years I thought family was about blood, last names, inheritance, but I realized I was wrong. Family is who shows up, who cares, who teaches values and truly lives by them." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You and Isabella have taught me more in these few months than I've learned in my entire life. You taught me about honesty, about forgiveness, about starting over. And I would like, if you agree, to consider you part of my family. Not on paper, not officially, but in what really matters. In the heart. Maria had tears in her eyes. Robert, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, he interrupted gently. But I want to. You saved me, Maria. You saved me from becoming a bitter, lonely man forever. You showed me there was still hope, and I am eternally grateful for that. Maria wiped her tears and smiled. Then we consider you family too. Isabella already asked if she can call you Uncle Robert. Robert laughed, a genuine, joyful laugh. She can. I would love that. That same month, Robert organized an event at the foundation. A dinner for all the employees of all his companies with their families. It was a simple event, without extravagance but full of human warmth. There were children running around, people talking, laughter echoing. During the dinner, Robert gave a speech. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I wanted to thank you, all for being here, he began. For many years I built companies, accumulated wealth, but I lost sight of what really mattered. I forgot that behind every job title, every position, there is a person with a family, with dreams, with struggles. And it was you, especially you, Maria, and you, Isabella, who reminded me of that. He gestured to where the mother and daughter were sitting, both blushing at the attention. I learned that honesty has no social class, that integrity can't be bought with money, that the smallest hands can carry the greatest values, and I learned that trusting isn't a weakness, it's courage. He paused, emotional. So I want to make a commitment today in front of everyone, a commitment that no employee of mine will be made invisible, that everyone will be heard, that everyone will have opportunities, because a company is only as strong as the people who build it, are treated with dignity, and a life only has meaning when it's shared with people who make us better. The applause was long and sincere. Maria was crying openly. Isabella got up and ran to hug Robert, not caring that everyone was watching. And he hugged her back, this girl who had changed everything with a simple act of organizing money that wasn't hers. The following years brought more transformations. Isabella grew up, continued to be an excellent student, and kept her values intact. At 16, she started volunteering at the foundation, helping other vulnerable children. At 18, she got into medical school at a top university in New York on a full scholarship. Robert was there on the day the results came out, crying alongside Maria, prouder than if she were his own daughter. Maria became a respected figure in the non-profit sector. The E Foundation, under her leadership, won national awards for social impact. She published articles on dignity in the workplace, on how companies can be profitable without being exploitative. She gave talks, inspired people, changed lives. And Robert finally found the peace he had been searching for decades, not in solitude, not in isolation, not in distrust, but in connection, in trust, built day by day, in the recognition that people could indeed hurt him, but that living in fear of it wasn't really living. He still had his company, his businesses, his money, but now he had something more valuable. He had family. He had purpose. He had the certainty that he was leaving the world a little better than he found it. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after it all began, Robert was in the mansion's garden. The house was no longer so quiet. Maria and Isabella had moved into their own apartment, bought with Maria's honest work, but they came to visit almost every weekend. Today they were having a barbecue. All the employees were invited, with their families. Isabella, now 15, tall and beautiful, sat next to Robert on the garden bench. "Uncle Robert," she said, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course," he replied. "Do you regret trusting us that day when everything was pointing to us being guilty?" Robert thought for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I regret that it took me so long to trust, that I let doubt speak louder than what my own eyes had seen. But I don't regret in the end choosing to believe, because believing in you changed my entire life." Isabella rested her head on his shoulder. "You changed ours too. You believed in us when no one else did, not even ourselves." They sat, there in silence, watching the people laughing, talking, living. And Robert realized that this This simple moment full of warmth was more valuable than all the fortune he had accumulated. Trust, he had learned, wasn't something you gave away recklessly, but it also wasn't something you denied out of fear. It was something you built brick by brick, gesture by gesture, choice by choice. And when built on a true foundation, it was indestructible. That night, after everyone had gone home, Robert was alone in the library. He picked up the old photo of him and his mother and smiled. "I made it, Mum," he said softly. "I got lost for a while, but I found my way back, and it was a 10-year-old girl who showed me where the light was." He put the photo away carefully and went up to his room. For the first time in decades, he didn't feel alone in that huge house. It had been filled with good memories, with real laughter, with moments that were worth more than any expensive object. And when he turned off the light and closed his eyes, Robert Miller slept in peace. A deep, true peace, earned not with money or power, but with humility, repentance, and the courage to trust again. Some truths, he had discovered, are only visible when the heart decides to see, and he had finally learned to look with his heart. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, Maria, and Isabella has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, honesty, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what struck you the most. Was it the moment Isabella organized the money, Maria's desperation at being unjustly accused, or Robert's transformation as he recognized his mistake and sought redemption? Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, making us reflect on trust, forgiveness, and the capacity to start over. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with a new story that will stir your emotions. Until then, remember, honesty knows no social class, and the smallest hands can carry the greatest values. A big hug, and see you next time.